You guys ready to rock?
Yep.
Sweet. And then again, if you guys have questions with this stuff in between, just stop me. I'd rather just handle questions as we go through this because you might forget them as we run through this. So this is module 3. We're just going over skills and drills with the idea, the linear idea of going through module by module, piece by piece in the typical structure of class, right? So what we're on now is the skill and the strength portion. So we're going to handle the purpose. We're going to go over bridging common errors to the 5Ds, weightlifting corrections, gymnastics corrections, and then addressing free trial athletes, so those who are new to class. One thing I do want to say going into this stuff is that when it comes to movement correction, it is a long rabbit hole, right? Like there's so much information out there about motor learning, about mechanics, about the nervous system, about all this stuff. So today what we're going to do is we're going to make this stuff really simple. I just want to make sure that you guys have at least 3 common things to look for and to work with on the floor. And I also want to see that you guys have a structure, right? So that's kind of what we're doing here. The purpose of models with the right tools to improve the movement of our athletes and create a structured approach to that goal. It's made up of 3 parts. Group in the beginning when you're working with everyone, experienced members one-on-one, and then obviously the free trial athletes one-on-one. So there's going to be a different approach to each one of those 3 sections. So with the skill and strength section, when we're dealing with the group, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're drilling all the level 2 movements, right? So something as simple as, you know, a back squat or a front squat or a press. We do want to demo it, but it's not necessarily important that we're sitting there with them with an empty bar and drilling it, right? You know, as a reminder, it's important that when we have new people in class, especially new people, that we are demoing that movement and that everybody understands what we're going for. So it's important to drill these level 2 movements for a few different reasons. One is, first, it allows you to give the athletes some focus points, right? Like we always want them to get better. We want to change the way that they think about movement and have them focusing on these things. And then the second reason is it allows you to debrief the room as needed to reduce the amount of energy it'll take to correct the movement being trained, right? And that's kind of the idea of debriefing in the 5Ds is you can actually do this through the actual drill or when they break out, right? So let's talk about bridging the 5Ds to drills. I mentioned this earlier when we actually met with you the first time we were going through the 5Ds. How I kind of look at it is with the end in mind, and then I kind of reverse engineer things from there, and that should be a helpful process for you when you're verbalizing this stuff and also figuring out what you're going to do. So building out the dissect portion of the 5Ds requires you to have an understanding of the common errors in certain movements, right? And then from there, once you've identified the top 3 errors in these movements, you kind of work backwards, right? So that would be when we're up here and we're running through it, verbalizing it, and you're going through the dissect. You want to give them at least 1 to 3 targets to hit, right? We want to also be very concise and not get too deep. Then we want to debrief the athletes if needed during the actual drilling or during their training, right? We call it the breakout, or when they're actually doing their own thing and they're grooving. Remember that when we do that, use of music is huge, right? Like turn down the music, go, guys, eyes on me, or let me get your attention real fast. You know what? As we're working through this movement and the snatch, I'm noticing that not a lot of you guys are really fully extending on that second pull. I want you guys to think about jumping off that second pull. All right, guys, let's see it. Music back up, right? And so remember, they're either grooving, vibing, or they're listening to you, right? There's only 2 modes. Okay, breaking out into training with individuals. So this is kind of my favorite thing about coaching, you know, like thinking back through all this stuff and how I've just naturally kind of picked up a sequence of things and perhaps unconsciously adapted it from other things that I've seen or read. But there's definitely a clear line of structure in terms of how to address movement and correct it effectively. So what I wanted to do was give you kind of a baseline template for that so that you can take the tools that I give you and then also everything that you do pick up along the way, add it to this template. This is what I've had a lot of success with. So now that we're done with drilling, everybody understands what they're trying to focus on, and we're in the breakout. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually spot correct one by one, right? So you're going individual, one by one. Remember, this is huge. Use their names when you guys are dealing with the athletes. It's actually funny, I just got back from San Diego and I was at this restaurant, and you could tell that the staff was trained to use names. The server came up and he's like, "Hi, I'll be your server. My name is XYZ. What's your name?" And I was like, "What? I haven't been asked my name at a restaurant in a really long time." Everyone at the table introduced themselves and he remembered the names. And immediately I was like, that's so smart of the owner to do that, because all of us at the table immediately felt more important, right? So you're gonna have a larger, it may seem like a small thing, but you're gonna have a larger impact with the athletes that you're working with when you do bring up their name. So I like to think of in this filter, the beginning, middle, and end to a lot of things, not just movement, but it will be helpful for you to identify what's going on if you start to section things like that. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end to this movement, right? All three must be hit to make a positive, lasting impact. All right, so what we have is basically a 3-step template, right? And there's subsections to this, but this is kind of how I look at movement correction when I'm dealing with athletes one-on-one, right? And this is gonna kind of help you organize your thoughts and kind of really hone in and focus on what may be the issue with an athlete's movement, right? So the first step is pretty obvious. It's identifying the origin. This is really where it can get difficult for coaches. I've had a lot of coaches come up to me and they're just like, "Man, I can't tell. I know something's wrong. I just don't know where it's coming from," right? So what I like to think about is watching the movement and starting from, okay, what's the beginning point? What's the next point? What's the next point? What's the next point? And just focusing on checking it off. Nope. Maybe that's it, right? It's a lot easier for coaches to figure that out. So where in the movement does the athlete go wrong, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. So think beginning, middle, and end. And then we're gonna go through some weightlifting, some gymnastics examples. So this will kind of make a little bit more sense in a little bit here. Step 2 is to digress the movement, right? And this is a common thing. Maybe you guys have heard that before, right? The first thing that we want to do is look at the position, right? So we can reduce their range of motion, or, it says reduct. I know Charlotte is like just crawling in her skin right now that she didn't get her hands on this before I put it out. Reduce the range of motion or change how they actually start the movement, right? So this is huge. A lot of coaches focus on, activation drills, mechanics, this and that, and it's like, well, were they even in the right starting point to begin with, right? That's going to dictate every subsequent action and movement. So we want to take a look at that first. Speed. This is big. We can either slow down or speed up a movement to get the desired result, right? Sometimes an athlete will speed through movements to compensate. They don't have full control. Maybe they don't have full strength. Maybe they don't understand their balance in the movement, right? And then on the other end, we might need to speed them up. Maybe they do have the power available to them, but they're not using it. They're not employing it in certain movements, and everything else from there is actually going wrong, right? So these are kind of the variables that we can start tweaking to help the athlete understand the movement better. Load. This is an obvious one, right? I think we get a bad name, generally speaking, in this industry for not actually taking too much consideration of the load. I think sometimes athletes have too much load and they're not moving well. So simply, if you strip that load down a little bit, what can happen is you'll see an improvement in their movement. And on the other end of things, if they're not moving an implement, perhaps maybe they're doing gymnastics work, we can help assist them through the movement to better understand it, right? There's a lot of drills like that using bands and physical assistance. Gymnastics being one of those things where you see a lot of coaches helping the athletes out. All right, step 3 is assigning the drill. So essentially, this is important. I mentioned this in a previous module. I'm going to mention it again because, you know, it's really important. I see it's common with coaches. So when we're drilling, we want to, number one, we're going through all those things in our head. We're like, okay, where's the movement going wrong? What am I going to do about it, right? And now, okay, this is where we're going to start. Now I'm going to give them something to focus on, right? I'm going to give them the drill. I'm going to make it as simple as possible. So I want to observe the drill, and I want to debrief them as needed, right? So it's like, this is what I think is going on. This is where I want you to start, and what I want you to do. This is why. Let's see it. They do the drill. Then you go, okay, this is what I want you to focus on because you're not quite hitting that target that I gave you. Debrief, correct, go, go, go. And then this is important when it starts to look like how it should look. I always ask for confirmation, okay? Do you feel the difference? All right, the reason that I do that is not only, it kind of finishes the whole process, right? But more importantly is it gets enrollment in the athlete as to like, oh, that drill worked, because maybe they'll do it on their own or they'll think about that, and it's going to help them consolidate whatever it is that you just taught them in their mind, right? In their movement. So we want to kind of encapsulate that, and that's where the confirmation comes in. Okay, then after that, I like to integrate it into the full movement. Maybe we're dealing with gymnastics or weightlifting, and we really reduce that range of motion just to focus in on where they're making that mistake, and we're micro drilling and debriefing, and finally, okay, that's what it looks like. Great, now let's add it back into the full range of motion if it's appropriate, and let's see if you can actually coordinate the whole thing now, right? Again, as a reminder, we're talking about, you know, for this specific thing, more advanced movements. All right. You guys have any questions so far? Pretty straightforward stuff. Cool. Weightlifting errors. Look at that animal. All right. So again, I want to repeat that there are so many different types of common errors, and then also you can subcategorize these into strength issues, activation issues, arm mechanics, skill, motor learning. There's a lot that can go wrong with movement, right? So I'm just going to give you some very simple common things that you're going to see a lot, right? So I'm essentially giving you the 80%, and then later on we're going to give you the 20. In the advanced modules, we're going to talk way more about mobility issues. We're going to talk about motor learning, drilling, mechanics, and all that good stuff. All right, so